But we're here to tell you that we have a moral and an ethical obligation to review what is being presented to us and make a determination based on the resentencing side, whether they deserve to be resentenced.
A stunning announcement in a shocking case that continues to make headlines across the globe even decades later.
We have not conceded one way or the other. We're not saying that there was anything wrong with the original trial. We have been given evidence. We have been given a photocopy of a letter that allegedly was sent by one of the brothers to another family member talking about him being the victim of molestation.
So let's turn the clock back just a bit and go back to 1989. On the night of August 20th, 1989, businessman Jose Menendez and his wife Kitty were watching TV together in their den at their Beverly Hills mansion. Unknown to them, two men would enter their home firing off several shots with a 12-gauge shotgun. Jose was shot 6 times, including a shot to the back of his head. And his wife Kitty was shot 10 times by the gunman. Right before the fatal shot to her cheek, she was reportedly on the ground, crawling away when one of the gunmen ran to the car to reload on ammunition before returning to the house and firing off the fatal blow to her face. The shocking shooting of the wealthy couple would lead many to wonder who committed the horrific crime. But at the time, more shocking news would develop when investigators arrested the couple's sons, Lyle and Erik, for their parents' murder. The brothers attempted to cover their tracks after murdering their parents. After the killings, both Lyle and Erik remained in the house, expecting police to respond to the sound of gunshots. But they later left to dispose of their clothes, which had their parents' brain matter and blood, then buried the shotguns along Mulholland Drive. They also went to a local movie theater and attempted to purchase tickets to Batman to use as their alibi, but didn't go with that plan because of the timestamp on the ticket stub. Then they went to the Taste of LA festival at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium before returning home. Still with no police responding to their home, Lyle called 911 to report his parents had been killed by unknown perpetrators. In the months following the killing, the brothers went on lavish shopping sprees and purchased luxury items like expensive sports cars and Rolex watches, but also businesses including a Buffalo Wing restaurant in Princeton, New Jersey. According to officials, the brothers collectively spent about $700,000 before their ultimate arrest. During the investigation, authorities would piece together more clues. Police reportedly investigated potential leads pointing to the mob, but later they began to suspect the brothers were the perpetrators and claimed they killed their parents for a financial motive. Things took another turn in the case when Erik Menendez confessed to the crime to his psychologist, Dr. Jerome Oziel, who then told his mistress, Judalon Smith, about the confession. Smith winded up telling police about the brothers' involvement. Lyle was arrested 7 months after the crime on March 8th of 1990, and his brother Erik was arrested 3 days later. In August of 1990, about a year after the crime, a California judge ruled the tapes of conversation between Erik and Oziel were admissible evidence, since Oziel said Lyle threatened him and violated doctor-patient privilege. That ruling was appealed, delaying the case for 2 years while the brothers remained locked up. Then the California Supreme Court ruled in August of 92 that most of the tapes were admissible with the exception of the tape where Erik discussed the murders. Then in December of 92, months after the ruling, an LA County grand jury indicted the Menendez brothers with the murders of their parents. During the brothers' first trial in 93, the brothers were tried together but with 2 separate juries. Their defense attorney, Leslie Abramson, said Erik and Lyle killed their parents out of fear for their lives after going through a lifetime of abuse by their parents, but most notably sexual abuse at the hands of their father. She painted their mother as an enabler and alcoholic who was also violent towards her sons and encouraged her husband's behavior. Those allegations were supported by the testimony of 2 family members. Erik and Lyle's cousin, Andy Cano, said Erik told them about the sexual abuse. The brothers' other cousin, Diane Vandermolen, said she told Kitty about Jose's alleged abuse of Lyle, and Kitty told her that didn't happen. And while the prosecution argued the murders were done for financial gain, the defense claimed the brothers didn't think they were getting an inheritance. In the first trial, both brothers would take the stand in their own defense. Erik testified weeks before the murders he told Lyle about the sexual abuse, which led to a confrontation within the family. Both testified their father threatened to kill them if they didn't keep the abuse a secret. The first trial ended with 2 deadlocked juries, and the LA County DA at the time, Gil Garcetti, announced the brothers would be retried. The second trial was a lot different from the first. There were no cameras in the courtroom. Lyle in the second trial didn't testify in his defense, but his brother Erik did, and jurors got limited testimony about the sexual abuse claims. Both Erik and Lyle were convicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, and both were sentenced to life in prison with no parole, avoiding the death penalty. Jurors reportedly noted the abuse defense wasn't a factor in their deliberations. Erik and Lyle went off to different prisons and have been behind bars ever since. Fast forward decades after the murders, new calls have been made to free the brothers. After the release of Netflix's Monsters, which highlighted the Menendez brothers' case, many social media users have called for the brothers to be freed based on the sexual abuse claims. Another advocating for their release is reality TV star and prison reform advocate Kim Kardashian. She wrote in a personal essay about the Menendez case, writing in part, "Erik and Lyle had no chance of a fair trial against this backdrop. Back then, there were limited resources for victims of sexual abuse, particularly for boys. There were virtually no systems in place to support survivors, and public awareness of the trauma of male sexual abuse was minimal, often clouded by preconceived judgments and homophobia. Can anyone honestly deny that the justice system would have treated the Menendez sisters more leniently? Despite overwhelming family testimony acknowledging the abuse Erik and Lyle suffered, the public remained skeptical." Prior to the recent social media frenzy in the case, the sexual assault allegations against Jose Menendez were also echoed by a former member of the boy band Menudo. Roy Rosilio, in the 2023 Peacock docuseries Menendez plus Menudo, Boys Betrayed, Rosilio alleged he was drugged and raped by Jose Menendez when he was a teenager. Then, in a stunning announcement, Los Angeles County District Attorney George Gascon said his office will review new evidence in the case.
First of all, I know that this is an area of tremendous interest nationally. We know, especially since the Netflix documentary came out, we're getting a lot of calls. Let me begin by saying, kind of walk you through a simple explanation of the legal issues here. There are 2 vehicles upon which people that have been convicted of a crime, well, there are many, but the 2 are a habeas and the other one's a resentencing. They can ask for a review of their conviction. We've gotten petitions for the brothers in both. Under a habeas, basically what someone that was convicted is asking a review of new evidence that had been made available. That had that evidence been available to the court and the jury at the time of the trial, perhaps the outcome may have been different. And then there's a second process, and it's called resentencing under California law, where a prosecutor can evaluate whether someone has been rehabilitated, and based on their actions and the fact that they're not involved in criminal activity inside the prison, that their sentence could be reevaluated. In this case, again, the Menendez brothers are asking for a review through both of those vehicles. We have not decided on the outcome. We are reviewing the information, but I think it's also important that we recognize that both men and women can be the victims of sexual assault. So today, what I want to make very clear, we have not conceded one way or the other. We're not saying that there was anything wrong with the original trial. We have been given evidence. We have been given a photocopy of a letter that allegedly was sent by one of the brothers to another family member talking about him being the victim of molestation. We've also got evidence that was provided by the defense, by his lawyers, that one of the members of the Menudo band alleged that he was molested by the father. None of this information has been confirmed. We are not, at this point, ready to say that we either believe or do not believe that information. But we're here to tell you that we have a moral and an ethical obligation to review what is being presented to us and make a determination based on the resentencing side, whether they deserve to be resentenced, even though they were clearly the murderers, because they have been in prison for 35 years and they have paid back their dues to society, or whether a habeas is appropriate if there was evidence that was not presented to the court at that time And had that evidence been presented, perhaps a jury would have come to a different conclusion. I don't think there is any question in this case that the boys or the men, young men, one was 19, the other one was 21 at the time, that they murdered their parents. I think that's factual, it's been established. I think the questions that are presented to us is two simple questions. One possibility, what is being alleged by his lawyers, not by us, that there was evidence that had that evidence been presented to the jury, the outcome of this case would have been different. And second, under California law, a path to resentencing where a prosecutor can evaluate whether someone has been rehabilitated, and if so, ask the court to determine whether the person should be resentenced. If they get resentenced, there are multiple things that could happen. They could walk out based on what the court decides, or they can have the sentence given a different shape, and perhaps they will stay on, but for a longer period, lesser period of time, or they can have a new trial. Right, and those are all options.
Now the brothers are in their 50s. Erik is 53 and Lyle is now 56. As they push for freedom, the LA County District Attorney said they will evaluate all of the new evidence at an upcoming hearing. Now, this case has so many layers to it that I actually want to bring on Dr. Joni Johnston, who is a clinical and forensic psychologist as well as licensed private investigator. Now, Joni, it's always so great to see you. This case was a little before my time, but I've always been very fascinated by it. You have these two brothers who were wealthy, they were handsome, but they brutally shot their parents to death. But then there's this added layer that being the allegations they were sexually assaulted by their father. What have been your thoughts overall on this case?
I think it's been very interesting to look at how it was presented in the media because it was not before my time, and to see just a lot of the attitudes, I think, and feelings about sexual abuse and who was sexually abused, who could be sexually abused, what that meant, those allegations, and to look at it from a different lens today. And so I think that's really been, I think, so interesting to see. And as a forensic psychologist, I think it's especially interesting to look at any evidence that substantiated their claims before that. Because one of the things that we always look at, of course, because you're in a forensic setting, people oftentimes have a motivation to not tell the truth because their lives are at stake or their freedom is at stake. And so we look for those kind of collateral sources or corroborating sources, and there do appear to be several of them. And it's interesting that my memory of this case in terms of how it was portrayed in the media is really different looking at some of the evidence that's come to light now.
And are you surprised that the LA County DA's office is going to be looking into the new evidence to determine if the brothers should be serving life sentences?
I think California has been pretty progressive in terms of trying to reevaluate people who are sentenced under the age of 25 anyway. And so I think they're going to be looking at it, it sounds like, from a lot of different perspectives. One being, was this kind of a fair trial in terms of some of these allegations that were suppressed after the hung juries? They'll be looking at that part of it. But I think the other thing they'll be looking at is has justice been served? What is the purpose of the justice system? And given the fact that they were so young, they were kind of considered juvenile offenders at the time, we have a different perspective, I think, on them as well. And so I think the other part will just be, again, has justice been served? And, is it time to let them out kind of regardless of the facts of the case?
And prosecutors at the time claimed that the brothers killed their parents for financial reasons. They thought they were going to be taken out of the will. And prosecutors at the time contended that there was no evidence of molestation. What are your thoughts on the prosecution's argument at the time, being that the abuse didn't happen?
I think that it's not that surprising to me. I mean, how often do we have evidence that, sexual abuse, particularly when it's in the home, happened? I mean, it's oftentimes a matter of one person saying it did. Perhaps they told other people or family members or a teacher, but we certainly don't have many eyewitnesses who witnessed this to happen. And so if you're a prosecutor and you see these two wealthy, handsome young men who are, after their parents are gone, who are living this lavish lifestyle and spending all this money, it's somewhat understandable, I think, that they latched onto this, not as, evidence of them being, relatively young adults, and also used to a somewhat extravagant lifestyle, but looking and connecting these dots, that it must be because of their spending all this money after the fact, that must be the reason that they killed their parents.
And it was also interesting because the brothers did go to such great lengths to kind of cover up what they did. They hid the shotguns, they got rid of the clothes, they tried to come up with an alibi. And in the months after, like you had just mentioned, they went on this huge shopping spree. What do you kind of make of that, given the allegations that they did kill their parents because of the sexual abuse? But what are your thoughts on just kind of the planning and then the aftermath of the killings, where, the boys weren't, or the brothers weren't even arrested until months after because of kind of this investigation, because they kind of hid so many clues in a way.
I think that's such an interesting point that you raise, because both can be true, meaning that abuse can occur, and people can kill their parents, and the link between the two can be very complicated. And so, typically when I'm, testifying or evaluating, when you have abuse allegations, unless there's an insanity plea or diminished capacity, we're really looking at it in the sentencing phase. So it's not that abuse means you're innocent. It's that what should happen perhaps in the penalty phase is that should be taken into consideration. And sometimes also it can be taken into consideration, obviously, in the actual trial phase if you're arguing for a lesser plea. But it's typically not an excuse or something that would result in somebody being found guilty. And I think in this case, there was clear evidence, I think, of premeditation, as well as, very specific attempts to cover up these crimes.
And why do you believe that the brothers weren't believed in their allegations before, and the prosecution kind of painted them out to be these homicidal monsters who killed their parents?
I think that is somewhat of a reflection of the times, meaning that I think really, back when these crimes occurred, I think if you looked up a definition of sexual abuse, it would be I would not be surprised that a woman or a girl was part of that definition. I think there really wasn't even a sense that a boy or a man could be sexually abused. You've heard people say, I think that the prosecutor may have said they didn't have the right equipment. And of course, we've thankfully grown, by leaps and bounds in terms of our understanding that abuse is abuse, and it doesn't matter whether you're a male or female or or anything in between. It's very possible to be sexually abused. And the other part of it, I think, that's really struck me about this case is I think we've also really become to appreciate and understand from a research point of view and a clinical point of view how devastating psychological abuse and humiliation is over time. And I think that's also something that wasn't really understood or taken into account in this case.
And you just mentioned a very interesting point as well. If the brothers were sisters, do you think that the outcome would have been different?
I do. I do think it would have been different. Now, does that mean I think they would have necessarily gotten off without any consequences? No, I don't think that's the case. And we could argue that maybe they shouldn't have gotten off because there's some evidence, again, of premeditation. There's no indication that I've seen that their lives were in immediate danger at the time that this occurred. And that's typically what the courts require for a self-defense, case to be successful. But I definitely do think that, for, ever since sexual abuse has become, I guess, on the kind of the public conscience, we are more likely to see females being victimized. And I think because of that, we're more likely to believe them.
And in your opinion, how much did social media and even the Netflix show Monsters, which highlighted the Menendez case, possibly contribute to the DA's office reviewing new evidence in this case?
Well, it seems like a couple of things. One is there's no doubt that, when you have the media shining a spotlight on a certain case, it does, draw people start talking about it. People start looking at it. People start talking to, law enforcement. People start talking to, their neighbors and those kinds of things. So I think it also grabs the attention of, people in the people in law enforcement, people in the public defender's office, people in the prosecutor's office, and those kinds of things. But it also seems like sometimes new evidence comes up. And so if you have somebody in a documentary, for example, who's saying, yeah, I was also sexually abused by this person, that's actually some new evidence. And so I think it's the combination of this increased awareness and attention, in addition to the fact that it might actually bring new evidence to light, which I think it may have in this case.
In your opinion, based on this new evidence, do you think that the Menendez brothers will be freed? Now you have like A-list stars like Kim Kardashian also kind of pushing for their freedom. But based on this new evidence, do you think there's a chance, even with this premeditation factor as well, too, that the brothers could be freed?
I think they very well could be. They might. Now, for a couple of reasons. I don't think it'll be because Kim Kardashian wrote a letter supporting them, although I think that certainly cannot hurt. I think they have a couple of things going for them. One being their prison records appear to be pretty good. They've done a lot of service and they have a pretty good programming track record, which is something a parole board looks at. They want to know, how have you lived your life between the time that you committed your crime and now? And so that would certainly weigh in their favor. So I think that would be a huge issue. And then the other thing is just the fact that it's been 35 years. So I think those two things may help them. And so the media, I think, certainly shines a spotlight and brings attention to this case. But I do think there needs to be more than that. It can't just be a popularity contest. There's going to have to be, I think, some legitimate reasons that, a parole board or a governor can look at and kind of go, yeah, we do see that this person has programmed, this person is no longer dangerous to society. And because of these factors, we're going to potentially release this person.
All right, Dr. Joni Johnston, I always appreciate your time and your insight into the cases that we cover. For this one, is there anything else you'd like to add before we sign you off?
I think it's just a really interesting case, and I think it's good to revisit and also to appreciate the fact that we really have come a long way as a society in understanding children and the trauma they go through and the impact it can have on them.
All right, Dr. Joni Johnston, again, thank you so much for your time today. I always appreciate it.
I always enjoy it. Thank you, Elizabeth.
The Los Angeles County DA said a hearing will take place next month on November 26th. At this time, Erik and Lyle remain behind bars in separate prisons in California. Lyle is in the Mule Creek State Prison, and Erik is about 500 miles away at the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.